Today we're going to ask, would George Washington have issued a stay-at-home order or shelter-in-place order? Please fact check me, and if I get something wrong, put a note down in the comments. Let's go back to 1793 in Philadelphia. Yellow fever struck Philadelphia, and yellow fever, in case you don't know, is transferred by mosquito bites, and sometimes it can cause liver damage, which can make your skin turn yellow, which is why it's called yellow fever. And in 1796, this act relative to quarantine was adopted by Congress, and it states that the precedent, you know what, they used F's instead of S's, so I'm going to just substitute it, that the President of the United States be and is hereby authorized to aid in the execution of quarantine and also in the execution of the health laws of the states. All right, so one thing we should note is that this did not permit federal authorities to institute quarantines by themselves. This was only to assist state and local quarantines that had already been declared by these jurisdictions. And even then, it was only when they asked the federal government to help. Okay, so my first answer is no, George Washington would not have issued the stay-at-home order because this didn't really authorize him to do that. And he was president of the United States, right? And I know you're thinking, hey, that's a cop-out. So, okay, then we'll go to this other hypothetical, which is, what if George Washington was the mayor of Philadelphia at the time yellow fever hit in 1793? What would he have done? Okay, let's see. Back in the 1790s, when you heard somebody say quarantine, well, that's stupid. You weren't alive in 1790. Okay, so let's assume George Washington was the mayor of Philadelphia at the time. Here's what the quarantine looked like back then at this time of yellow fever. The cities were quarantined, so sometimes cities would not let people from Philadelphia come into their city because they didn't want them bringing yellow fever in. So they would quarantine them and not let them come in for several weeks. The ports were quarantined. So if a ship came in, the people on the ship and the cargo, they were quarantined for several weeks. And also the sick were quarantined. So if you had yellow fever, you were obviously taken off to a place and put there until you either got better or died. That's my understanding. So that's what the quarantine meant back 1793, Philadelphia, all right? Now, these coronavirus, COVID-19 stay-at-home orders, shelter-in-place orders, what do they look like? Well, I mean, generally, I think we had sometimes there was interstate travel was limited. I don't think this was, from what I understand, it wasn't super widespread, but I know there were some reports where states stopped some people traveling in from different states. So maybe that's the equivalent of a city being quarantined. With the coronavirus, I think some ports were limited. I know we had some people on ships who could not get off for a very long time. I think airports were much more limited. It was much harder to travel. So maybe we can say that was equivalent. So our ports were quarantined as well. Let's just say that that's the equivalent. The sick were quarantined. If you had COVID-19, they were definitely quarantined, okay? So those three things match up, right? But the one thing that we have today with these stay-at-home orders or shelter-in-place orders was that healthy people were actually ordered to stay at home. This was not the case back with the quarantines with yellow fever, okay? So I feel like, no, George Washington would not have done the stay-at-home order that we have today because it's more limited than the quarantines back in 1790s with yellow fever. One interesting quote, this was in a writing back around 1793, it says, acquaintances and friends avoided each other in the streets and only signified their regard by a cold nod. The old custom of shaking hands fell in such general disuse that many shrunk back with affright at even the offer of a hand. That actually does sound familiar. And if we look back at the Twitter feed from people at the time of yellow fever, I feel like we can see how frightened they really were. Like, here's a tweet from William Jones. God is punishing us with yellow fever. We must repent. And here's another tweet. Elizabeth Smith, I should have stayed in England. James Clark said, Philadelphia blows. And again, the only way I think we'd really know is if we could talk to George Washington. So, and I don't think we can, probably. I am George Washington, and I approve of this message. Thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment below, and turn on notifications so that you can find out any of the new cool things that I'm talking about on YouTube. All right? Thanks. See you later.